Oh, another one. Okay. Transport equations always have something changing in time, a convective object, a production of the object which is convected or changing in time, the dissipation of it, the diffusion of it, and its molecular diffusion. Okay, here the turbulent diffusion and the molecular diffusion. Okay, that's going to repeat itself in every kind of additional turbulent equation, transport equation. That's going to be also in the omega. I told you to get the energy equation for the turbulent energy equation, we simply multiply by the perturbative velocity, and we do an average. So we get this ugly thing here, which has many objects like a triplet correlation between perturbative velocities and many weird objects that we can solve for. So we need to make ad hoc assumptions to turn these into features of the average flow. Okay?
Okay.
So now I'm going to go back to all of CFD and under the objects that you saw there. Okay?
Yes.
Here is the triple correlation. Each of them has a job. Okay? One of them is pressure due to only turbulence. The one of them is the transport of turbulent energy due to fluctuations, diffusive transport of kinetic energy. This is an exact equation. Okay?
Okay.
By this point, we haven't made any ad hoc assumption, but now we're going to make some. Okay, the ad hoc assumptions are such that we're going to have an equation in the end which doesn't have in it any perturbative velocity. Okay? So these ad hoc assumptions are kind of an issue. I mean, we already model all the turbulence. And not only that, we don't even solve the exact equations of the modeled equations. But lucky for us, Rans has proven itself very good for flows which are binding to the law of the wall, which we're going to see again in a few minutes. And then there's the epsilon equation. Now, we can derive the epsilon equation the same way, modeling the case. We can derive the epsilon equation the same way we derive the K equation, the turbulent kinetic energy equation, but it's quite cumbersome. So what we do, and it's an issue. It's an issue. It's not like it's something that we need to say. Yeah, it doesn't matter. It does matter. We do an analogy. We take a production term, a destruction term, a diffusion term, and we handle the fact that we don't know epsilon by combining some connection with these constants here that you see. Okay, these constants are empirical, that we're going to get them from experiments, from DNS maybe. Okay, so we have an analogous equation which looks like the ad hoc equation for the kinetic energy, but for epsilon. We can do the same for omega. Okay? Okay. We can do the same for any length scale that we want to add. I mean, the kinetic energy is like a feature of the velocity, and we need a length scale, and then the equations are closed because we can derive an eddy viscosity and solve at least for the average flow in Navier-Stokes equation.
Okay.
Now we're going to go to the K-omega. So that's a little bit explanation about, here you see the final form of the K-epsilon equations. Launder, Spalding, 1974, found the constants. The constants are bound to the law of the wall. We're going to about a little bit about near wall modeling. We're going to see the law of the wall again. And it means that if we have something which is quite different, waiting room, admit, which is quite different from flat plate, then it is suggestible to test and validate our analysis very well. Okay?
Thomas,
any questions by now?
One second. Actually, one has raised a message like they can't see any PowerPoint or other material at the blog except the blog. Can you look into that one?
You can't see any material except at the blog.
I think.
Please share entire screen.
Yeah, we see only the blog.
Yeah, I'm able to see the equation.
Yeah, now it is okay.
No, okay. So I need to share every time the page I'm trying. Okay.
Okay.
So what you see here is the standard K-epsilon model. You don't see correlation. All these constants, which are not to plate for. You open Fluent and you see these constants, you can touch them, but then the K-epsilon or K-omega or whatever equations, I'm not going to the law of the wall, and frankly, they are not going to be calibrated, and you're going to get nonsense. Okay. Now we're turning into the a little bit of history about K-omega. The original K-omega, let me share the screen again, pause, share the screen, yeah, yeah. The original and first K-omega introduced in the 1942, and it is the first complete model for turbulence. You probably understand what means complete. Complete means we have the length scale and we have a velocity scale. We can produce.
One second.
Yes.
Actually, we are hearing a big sound. Can you check that one?
Hearing the big things. I'm not sure it's for me.
Yeah, still hearing that.
It's not from my room.
Okay.
Let's mute everybody. Sit down.
Yeah, now it's fine.
Lady? Why did sit down, 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 sit, lady, sit. Okay.
Sit down.
Sit down.
Yeah. Now that beeping sound was gone.
Yeah, each and every one of you who wants to, from Nishi Shapiro to me, I didn't see the people on the waiting room. Admit all.
No.
I think there was a kind of a confusion in the post. It said 6 o'clock and then it said 6:30. Right? Am I wrong?
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, but we need a setup. Probably you saw that we had some problems here. So participants,
No.
each and every one of you who wants to show them faces, it's okay. Those of you who are ashamed or are too beautiful to make us feel unease may leave the video off. You can unmute yourself, I think, if you're not making noises, if you have any questions. So that's for the new admitters to the group. So the first K-omega actually invented was by the great Andrei Kolmogorov in 1942. It is like 30 years before beeping is back.
Yes,
So
Toma.
someone is beeping. I'm muted. Now again, it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Whom you have muted?
Someone an alarm clock. I mean,
Maybe
probably
the
wanted
case.
to wake up for but couldn't. Okay, so let's continue and let's continue fiercely. Okay.
Okay.
So the first complete model, by complete I mean it has two equations. We have zero equations models. We have one equations models, which is more for the kinetic energy. We have special kinetic and special one equation models like the Spalart-Talmaras, which is a one equation model, but it's a closed one. It's a complete one because it has the transport equations for the eddy viscosity. And then there are the most useful ones. The Spalart-Talmaras is mostly for aerodynamic flows. The K-epsilon, the K-omega, and all the rest of them. The first one was introduced by Kolmogorov, and it's quite amazing. He did most of his stuff really disconnected from the West. The model was a model as a model should be, as I would write it on paper, but it wasn't codable, but never been tested, and it wouldn't have worked. It had some anyway, no way to solve such nonlinearities at this time. Now we're going to go to the slide share of share. Okay. Let's start talking about K-omega models. What we're going to talk today is about advanced two equation models. I told you about the history of the K-omega. So it started with Kolmogorov, beginning of the 80s. Just imagine that Launder and Jones had their model at 1974. The K-epsilon had even before, some from Spalding. So in about 1982, David E. Wilcox derived K-omega. The K-epsilon had some obvious problems, most of them related to the inability to integrate through the viscous sublayer. It's wall sensitive, and this made a lot of problems. So Wilcox devised a model which actually avoids the problem of wall sensitivity. And you can derive the omega model exactly like you derive the epsilon model, derive the kinetic and turbulent kinetic energy, and then use an analogy and some constants that you afterwards going to check by experiments or DNS, and derive an equation for omega. And that's the Wilcox model. But the Wilcox model had real problems with arbitrary values for the omega equations in the free flow coming from the inlet. I mean, the variation in the answers could vary by nearly even 40%. So, although it solved the problem of wall sensitivity, it couldn't be used for aerodynamic flows because of the free stream problem. Then Florian Menta, while now the ANSYS guy in charge of Turbulence. I think some of you might know him. This at the time it was NASA Langley. He derived a model. He said quite ingenuinely, why won't we derive a new model combining the best of the two? We'll use if you have a chance working along with. I can't read the messages. I'm sorry. You can just ask. Just unmute yourself and shoot. Okay. So while at NASA Langley, he devised a model called the baseline model. And it was purely on engineering thought. Why don't we combine between the both of two words, the K-epsilon near the wall and the K-omega away from the wall? But the other way around, the K-omega near the wall where there's no sensitivity and the K-epsilon away from the wall. You can see here the K-epsilon is very stiff near the wall. You can't integrate the epsilon equation to the viscous sublayer. So you either have to use wall functions, or you have to, when we'll talk about near wall treatment, you'll see how problematic it is. Or you have to use a low Reynolds model, which means very nonlinear damping functions and problems with convergence. On the other way around, K-omega of Wilcox is very good at the wall. It even has what's called an elliptic nature. It communicates with the wall. In the logarithmic layers, both of them are pretty accurate. And in the wake region, there's the free stream problem of the omega sensitivity to inlet conditions. So Menta said, why don't we combine between the two? Of course, it can't be a combination which be sharply defined. And we don't want to solve two equations, one for K epsilon and one for K omega. So what we're going to do is use the Wilcox K omega near the wall and a K epsilon model, which is transformed to a K omega model away from the wall. Okay? So the K omega as it is, as I said, as we can derive it like we derive the epsilon equation, is the Wilcox equation. Okay? When we take the epsilon, and there's a connection between the waiting room and NATO. Do you see these messages that I get? Or no? Many messages. Okay, there's a connection between omega and epsilon. You can easily derive equation for the for the epsilon equation by means of omega, and you get an additional term. What's so wonderful about this additional term? It's that near the wall, it kind of has no effect. It's actually a cross diffusion term. But near the edge of the boundary layer, it prevents the arbitrarily conditions that the omega equation gets from the inlet. So problem solved. Problem almost solved. The thing is that, so here you see the blending has to be, so now we have one equation. The equation is for K omega. And we have something that Menta does a lot. He will do it again in the S-best model and in the transition model and in every model that he has. Is using blending functions and blend between the two and arrive at a model which is the baseline K-omega model. So most of you say yes, the shear stress transverse is K-epsilon away from the wall and K-omega. No, that's the BSL model. So we have a new BSL model. The constants are a little bit different. We have a little disadvantage. Now we have the F1, which asks for the calculations. I mean, it's a linear calculation, but it's still a little bit less faster than solving like a realizable K epsilon. But with now computers, I mean, most runs problems don't feel these kind of issues. So that's the additional thing. The blending function itself is always very sophisticated and always has something secret in it. But you can probably say that the switch happens in the logarithmic layer and mainly in the middle of the boundary layer. Okay. Now the shear stress transport, what is it? What we've noticed that's in honor of Bradshaw observation that the shear stress in the boundary layer is proportional to the kinetic energy. And turbulence implied by standard equation models looks like this. It looks quite the same. It looks actually exactly the same, but multiplied by the square root of the production of the kinetic energy and its dissipation. And usually it's for equilibrium flows, it's 1. But when we get near separation for non-equilibrium flows, which is an issue, or when we get, which was a problem of the K-epsilon, it used to predict delay separation. We saw that this value of production to dissipation could be very, very high. So what we did, we put a limiter on the value, which is 10. You can send and we clip it, and then essentially we have a model which produces the effect of no delay separation. Which was a problem with the K-epsilon and is still a problem with the BSL. Sometimes it's the other way around. That's a tip from an experienced CFD practitioners. Sometimes the K-omega SST produces a separation where we're not expected, or when we afterwards don't validate to have one. So we should be wary about it a little bit. So that's about here's the link. Yes. And between non-equilibrium flows and equilibrium flows, equilibrium flows is flows by which do you see my mouse? Yeah, which the production of kinetic energy and its dissipation are nearly the same. So it's nearly 1. So it looks exactly like this. But in non-equilibrium flows, the production could be very big, especially near stagnation points or separation points where the shear stress goes to zero, and then problem comes. Limiter for the mu-t, that's less interesting here. Diffuser follow shows you how the K-epsilon model doesn't predict separation at all, while the SST model predicts separation. That's a kind of a validation example. It's a fix for to prove the point. But again, you should consider. I will say a few words about when do choose models like the K-epsilon realizable, and do not make the K-epsilon SST your default, although the ANSYS family made sure that you do. So there are a little bit of examples here. It's a bit of nice examples here. Model additions, buoyancy term. For cases where buoyancy is really, 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 really important. Those of you who deal with it, is there anyone here who deals with highly buoyant flows? Then you should consider it. Yes. So do you have a remark about the subject? You can unmute yourself and ask.
Yeah, hi.
Yeah.
I'm looking for fire simulation in subway station, actually. So that's why the buoyancy term is quite important to get the correct smoke flow in subway station.
And it's an interesting problem. I mean, my friend, my co-author in all about CFD that's what he's dealing with. So
yeah,
but I don't know if you heard about him, but
actually, I still use Fluent, but the communities more use FDS as
no. He used
LAS.
FDS. He used FDS and LES.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, but for myself, I still use Fluent. But
cool. That's cool.
Yeah,
that's cool.
yeah.
That's I mean, yeah. I want you.
Okay, perfect.
So I don't have much to say about it. I mean, probably you need to use it when you use it, right? I mean,
actually, yeah, I use the full buoyancy the full buoyancy effect from the K epsilon. Yeah.
Yeah.
For all the terms. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So here exactly the full buoyancy effect. You can see the fluent viscous model choices, standard model, enhanced wall treatment. Okay. Buoyancy effect for omega. You can also use, but you say you use the K-epsilon for solving such problems.
Yeah, I still use the K-epsilon. Yeah.
Okay, a much more familiar problem that many have to confront is the streamline curvature. It's the curvature correction. And the curvature correction is something you apply to have, I mean, the results of a U-bend with or without the curvature correction are extremely different. Just to show you, what is it based on? Okay. I should share screen again. Okay. The correction is exactly taken from the Spalato-Maras model rotation correction, the Spalato-Shur correction. If anyone wants to read about it, I mean, this model is like a work of art of tailoring a model. What they did there is, you know, they did order the flows to two kinds of flows: those with thin layers with weak rotations, and those with homogeneous rotating shear vortex cores with strong rotations, and they handle all of these. And then Mentor just took it and used it for the curvature correction. So it's the same Spalato correction that you already know, but you should use it. But you should use it if you have swirling flow problems. I mean, it's going to make a difference. Curvature correction for two equation models. We'll take the develop channel flow. What's really important to me is to talk about stagnation correction. Stagnation corrections are pretty important. And here is some place that maybe the K-omega SST might not be the best choice to take. If you have a flow with many stagnation regions, which are important, I mean, maybe they are not important, and I mean, if you solve an incompressible flow problem, it impacts all of the domain, but maybe not in such a big way. But if it is important, then there's the Keto-Lambda modification. What the Keto-Lambda modification does is uses for the production of the kinetic energy instead of the dynamic viscosity, dynamic eddy viscosity times the shear stress. You know what S is? I mean, everybody knows what S is, right? That's the shear stress. It depends upon the average velocity gradient tensor. Okay, it's half times that. I mean, we can't shove a full turbulent course inside this. But what it does is, because the shear gets very high near the walls, the production of the kinetic energy gets very high there, and you get erroneous results. So what it does, it multiplies it by the rotation vector, which is also derived from the tensor of the gradient velocity tensor. Okay, half times this minus ij divided by 2. The problem with this is when you use this along with the curvature correction, because now the production of kinetic energy all over the model is dependable above the rotation, and you might get erroneous results in the entire domain. So watch out from using the Keto-Lambda. They kind of solve it with the GEKO, so you shouldn't have problems with it. Okay.
Can you please?
Any questions?
Can you please say or explain further why we problems when we use the stagnation plus the curvature correction?
Yeah, because the Keto-Lambda modification changes the production of kinetic energy from depending only upon the shear stress squared to this multiplicity you see here with S and the rotation vector. Okay, so it does that because when you get to a stagnation point, you get excessive generation of turbulent kinetic energy, and the results are erroneous. This is okay, but if you also have swirling flow in the domain, then all the production of kinetic energy that you have, anyway you solve the equations, are going to use the Keto-Lambda definition, which means that the rotation vector is going to have a big effect on the result. Okay?
Okay.
So usually what the recommendation is that if you have a swirling flow, also have lots of stagnation flow points, and both of them are of investigations. Use the realizable K-epsilon model, which kind of is huge advantage as is its way of dealing with stagnation flows.
And what about the alternative of clipping the production term? Maybe it works better for curvature flows?
You can clip the production term, but still you're gonna get area you have where you have thin shells swirling flows. So I mean that's how the curvature, the Schur Spalart curvature correction works. So you should be careful when using the Keto-Lambda modification. If you'd like, you can message me later, and I'll send you the Gekko guidance, and you can enrich your knowledge about it a little bit more. I mean, a little bit more deeply. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
It's gonna be great. Okay. So, any more questions about the K-omega, K-omega ST, K-omega baseline model? We're not going to touch the transition model. I think it's too much for today. It's my favorite topic.
Sorry, Tomer, I have just one last question. You mentioned that you do not recommend to use the SST as fluent change it in the
No.
version.
I mean, I do recommend to use it as a default model most of the time, but it doesn't mean that it's like all inclusive and does everything better than any other model. I mean, I can show you at least 10 problems of which the realizable K-epsilon with different, even with different calibration constant, gave better answers. Or when the BSL gave better answers than the K-omega SST. So it's not, you need to validate your results. You need to check a few turbulence models, see how they react. There is also the EARSM. If you have corner flows, like a tube, a square tube, then you get these vortices on where the walls connect, and two equation models can't solve these at all. The problem is the linear eddy viscosity model. I mean, it cannot derive enough shear to these areas. So what you get is sometimes a big rotational areas. Sometimes you get it flipped. So again, don't take a model as a default. I mean, essentially you're doing runs. I mean, all of the turbulence is going to be the model. You're solving a turbulence problem. All of what is going on is turbulence. All of it is the model. So essentially,
I'm totally agree with you. The fact is that the K-epsilon may be a little bit faster to get the first approximation by using the wall function instead of the SST, which the obligation of resolving.
Yeah. So
the mesh will be more complete.
That. Very good that you're saying that right now. I have something to say about. We're going to get to the near wall functions now, and then I'll say something about the very important that you should take in mind. Very important about wall functions.
So the meshing approach, it's very different for the SST than the K-epsilon, right? By using the standard or the scalable wall function, right?
Of course.
That's it. Yeah.
Of course, the K-omega. You mean the K-omega? The K-omega is wall insensitive. The Spalatal-Maras model is wall insensitive. When you use, we're going to get there now, right now.
Okay, thank you.
So that's the other part, the near wall modeling, which I'm sure everybody admit. It's not this page. I lost myself. So, okay. Near wall modeling. Let's share the screen. So now we're going to go a little bit back to basics, because some of you might be shocked to see the law of the wall in front of you right now. Some of you might be not. This is, if anyone doesn't know the law of the wall, this specific post is the turbulence near wall treatment, and it has a full derivation of the law of the wall, so you can understand what the law of the wall means. Generally, the turbulent boundary layer separates to few regions. These regions are not connected directly. You should actually use perturbation theory to find an accurate match. But there's the viscous sublayer or the laminar sublayer, which is linear. Remember, we have a logarithmic layer here. These are Y+. They are wall units. Okay. This is U+, divided by Y+. Okay. So till Y plus equals 5, there's it's the viscous sublayer. It's kind of a laminar sublayer, and when you use we're going to get there, but when you use a low Reynolds model, you need to have, or when you want to check for drag or get some heat transfer results, which are very, very accurate, you would need to have Y+1 anyway. It doesn't matter if you decide to use low Reynolds model or with its own deficiencies of Van Driest's nonlinear terms and stuff like that, or you use K-omega. You still need the resolution inside Y+1 and probably even less, because you want to hit. Then there's a buffer layer, which is kind of a connecting layer. In ANSYS, it's 11.125, I think. which they use it for the enhanced wall treatment to decide whether to use wall functions or to use low Reynolds modeling. And then there is the inertial sublayer or the log layer. What you can see at the log layer, for the wall functions. So you need to be very wary. So using wall functions is usually when you have a high Reynolds problem, not when you have turbomachinery problems or I don't know. Nothing comes up to mind right now. But you should be very careful. Okay, so you should have the right resolution, which means that the boundary layer, the thing you call boundary layer, should be covered by, according to Florian Menta, not me, at least 15 layers of mesh, prismatic mesh, of course, because we don't want to have numerical dissipation issues. We want the mesh to be aligned with the normal to the prism, right? That's why we build the inflation layers. 15, and sometimes in problems of aerodynamics, it even gets to 40 or 50. Okay? So remember that high Reynolds number, the end of the log layer could be about 5,000, 10,000. Low Reynolds number problems like turbomachinery or I don't know, other kinds of low Reynolds problems like non-Newtonian simulation you're doing on blood flow or something like that. And you decide to use a turbulent model because you have, or a transition model because you have many sites of obstructions. Then you should know that you should have these 15 layers inside this Y plus 400 end of the log layer. I mean, because that's what you do when you use wall functions. You put the first grid, the middle of the grid actually in the middle in Y plus 30, right? Or 70. So take this in mind. So we explained about the biviscous sublayer, the buffer layer, the inertial log layer, the defect layer. There's a calculator here to calculate your y plus from the physical units that you actually need to put. I mean, your y plus 1 could be like 6 microns for an airplane, or use pointwise as a calculator. It's faster. It's pretty cool. So near wall modeling is probably the most important thing in turbulence. I mean, it's also the reason why we cannot still use less as an engineering tools. You probably see a lot of less in the combustion fields, because the action is away from the walls. But when we get near the walls, 95% of the mesh is concentrated near the walls, and the cells cannot be stretched, and the size of the Kolmogorov scale. And according to Philip's palette, we're not going to be able to solve a problem of a full airplane with large eddy simulation till 2070. So, but we wouldn't have any turbulence if we wouldn't have any wall. So from a practitioner's standpoint, modeling the wall right is the most important thing, because that's where shit happens. Shit doesn't happen in the free flow, usually, except in jets or shear flows. I mean, of which runs actually doesn't perform very well. Let's go to instead of talking about why low Reynolds is, because we talked about it last time. There's an option of wall functions, high Reynolds. There's an option of near wall modeling approach of low Reynolds with something like Van Driest functions, which are admit. Still people want to admit. Which are non-linear and may the simulation not to converge, but you can still use them. There are a few ways to do both the wall function and the near model approach. I'm going to talk about Fluent, assuming most of you are using Fluent, but I wanted you to know that I'm a distributor of Star CCM, so it's my preference that you move from Fluent to Star CCM. I think you could derive better stuff from there. In Fluent, we use the Y star. Does anybody know why we use the Y star?
Because you don't have to solve a non-linear iteration problem to calculate it.
More exactly, because when we get to separation, yes, exactly. The shear at the wall goes to 0, and then the friction velocity, which is dependable upon the shear wall, goes to 0, and then you have some kind of problem which breaks down, kind of. And do you know when you have zero stress at the wall? At separation. At separation, of course. Yeah. So you have a separation point and an inflection point above it, and it can't calculate it. So they used a different calculation, which is simply avoiding this predicament here. But it's essentially the same in everything else. You can show you. I mean, probably most of you go with I don't know, a pointwise calculation of y plus, then run. Use first layer and then simulate, and then check the y plus, and then do some adjustments. So you can do it with the y star. Anyway, when there is a separation, the runs model doesn't function anyway. I mean, it's erroneous to explore a separation region with runs. Okay, so this is y star. That's that. I thought
So when we don't have a separation,
when you don't have a separation, there are exactly the same.
There is any physical problem of engineering interesting that doesn't involve separation?
There is. Flow over a flat plate doesn't involve separation, as much as I know. Of course. Just when you have this issue of an inflection point in the velocity profile, then you might have a zero stress shear wall. Shear wall might be zero, and you have a separation, so you cannot calculate this friction velocity. So they made a switch to y star, which is kind of based on different notions, but looks exactly the same, except stuff that it's beyond your... And Fluent employs this 11.225, which below that a laminar stress-strain relationship is employed, and above that it's the log law is employed. So they cut the buffer layer. There is no buffer layer. Standard wall functions. We've spoken about it. From everything written here, problems such as there's another option for low Reynolds problem, UAVs, or even those tiny how are they called? Quadrupers. There you have a low Reynolds, and you might have problems to have the correct resolution of mesh inside the boundary layer. I'm going to show you in a moment how you check for what's the best way to check for the getting correct description of the boundary layer, but keep that in mind.
I have a question actually. Can I ask?
Again?
I have a question. Can I ask?
Cool.
Actually, y plus value we will calculate, right? To define the first cell size from the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And when we made a mesh using that value, and when we import that mesh to ANSYS Fluent, the y plus value we obtain in ANSYS Fluent will be quite different. Actually, I faced that issue. Do you ever face that?
You calculate a physical distance, and then
for the y plus, I mean y star,
and you think it's like y plus equals 2, I guess, and then you go back to Fluent, and of course because the derivation for y plus is based on flat plate, and you have a complex geometry. So you're not going to get the same y plus everywhere. You have calculation for y plus for pipes also, but essentially we're solving engineering problems, and the y plus is going to be very different from area to area. It's also dependable upon places that you have refined the mesh. if you refine the mesh, then in one place you're going to have a Y plus physical distance smaller cell, and the Y plus will be something. And in another place where you have more less refined cells, then the Y plus is going to be bigger. But essentially, it's based on the flat plate boundary layer. So you can't expect an airplane to have a constant Y plus that you choose. But you should expect to have a Y plus under 1 if you, in every place that you want to check your drag, let's say, or your very important heat transfer calculations.
Yeah, actually, for that only I faced.
So then you
this
might
issue.
have so then you might have an area which is Y plus 1 and an area which is Y plus 0.1.
This actually less than I didn't get any time. Higher only I got. Like I decided for 0.1 Y plus, and in Fluent it became 0.5, 1, 1.5 like that. So actually I didn't get the exact reason for that when I looked into.
Again, I don't know how you calculated the Y plus.
Like Y plus
I
will
mean,
be.
I'm sorry. I don't know how you calculated the physical Y from the Y plus you wanted to get. Let's say you wanted to get Y plus equals 1, and you calculated and you got some Y.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
then you say that the Y plus there is different.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the Y plus is essentially some kind of a measure of a local Reynolds number.
Okay.
You can look at how it defines. It is defined with the rho and shear velocity. It's a kind of wall Reynolds number, and locally it's changing.
Can be that.
And it can have an impact on cases where you have zero chance to make mistakes, like airplanes, where they take even negative values for or heat transfer problems when you need to get very, very accurate, like on, I don't know, chips.
Chips, yes, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, by chips, I mean wafers or something like very accurate. So you need to take care of that, and you need to take care of that you have 15 layers at least inside the boundary layer. That's important.
But will it be really, I mean, practically possible to get 15 layers of the mesh with compromised computational resources?
That's your problem.
Okay.
I used to use a cluster with 32, sometimes 96, and sometimes it takes it takes time. If it's a transient problem, it might take days. You don't have the UPS, it might even fall dead in the middle. But we are in the stage that we can use runs for engineering large-scale problems. I mean, that's how you should work. If you want to get the gross estimation, I mean, okay, get the gross estimation. I mean, lift, for calculating lift, you don't need such a Y plus, I mean. And drag calculations, heat transfer calculations are kind of different. Okay, let's go through some of the kinds of very fast. So wall functions, we said the thing with the low Reynolds and high Reynolds thing. Okay, take that in mind. Really take that in mind. 15 layers and above. That's the ANSYS. That's the Menta recommendation. That's some even use, I know, in Raphael or in 40, 30 layers is the minimum. And yes, they use clusters. Okay, we have scalable wall functions. Sometimes the grid is located somewhere near the buffer layers. So to avoid, and as you said, it changes along the wing, it changes along the body of what you're trying to manufacture. And scalable wall functions, what they do is they scale it to be located everywhere at y star under 11, let's say. So that's a good way to use scalable wall functions. Is one way to use wall functions without being too much worried about resolution. Non-equilibrium wall functions. These are for cases where you have non-equilibrium flow. I don't know, jets, stuff like that. Shear flows. And then you should use. I usually don't use that. Enhanced wall treatment. That's the EWT. This is used to resolve the viscous sublayer. This is the low Reynolds model that ANSYS uses. It's what's called a two-layer model. For regions above 200, the original K-epsilon, the standard one, is employed. For regions of which it's below 200 and it's locally, the low Reynolds is employed. Not the low Reynolds. A one equation model is employed. That's very important. The Wolfstein equation. Okay, so that's what you get with enhanced wall functions. So you see where the K-omega SST might have lots of advantages. I mean, which you're usually not aware of. The Menton-Lechner is essentially a way to make, it's a two-layer model, essentially made to make the K-epsilon insensitive to Y+. As long as you have sufficient resolution at the boundary layer, the Menton-Lechner will solve the model either by low Reynolds or standard way with no problem. So no one uses it, but you can. And any questions about? I promised you I'm going to show you the best way to estimate if your boundary layer is okay. Okay, the best way to do that is to use the EVR. That's the eddy viscosity ratio. You might call it eddy viscosity if you don't have variable dynamic viscosity. The EVR is typically, you see, EVR typically clearly indicates boundary layer as it has its maximum in the middle. Okay? So now you see a boundary layer, and you see in the middle of the boundary layer, these are prismatic cells. They look like inflation cells. I think they put here, this is for dynamic flows, I think they put here about 40 cells in the boundary layer. And it covers the area of which the EVR, the eddy viscosity ratio, is the biggest. So that's something that you should do. What most of you do is take the velocity profile and just look when it looks like free flow and when it drives back to the no slip boundary condition. It's not good enough. Okay. Yeah. As a matter of fact, you should be able to predict a point of separation with a Rands model, two equation Rands model, but not even two equation Rands model. I mean, even RSM, I mean, Reynolds stress models. But you shouldn't explore a separation with Rands model. I mean, it has, by essence, the Bézinesque hypothesis is based on the symmetric part of the velocity gradient, which means that it has problems with curvature and rotation, and of course with the very non-temporal flow you get inside the separation zone. So just don't use that. You can use a monolithic hybrid like SBAS, or shielded detached eddy simulation, which we do the runs near the wall, and then away from the wall it will know when to switch, how to switch monolithically to large eddy simulation. Or you can use WM less, wall model less, or you can use if it's some kind of small problem like a pipe flies over a pipe, you can use large eddy simulation, but massive separations and highly non-equilibrium flow are not the field of Reynolds average Navier-Stokes calculations. Yeah, but you can predict the point of separation. I mean, like pretty good, and then validate it, and the point of reattachment maybe very good, and we haven't spoken about the Gekko model. Do anyone want to talk about the Gekko model, or it's too late? You can unmute yourself and say whatever you want.
Toma?
Yeah.
Actually, can you explain about this EVR model a little bit? Why? Because for boundary layer, you are saying velocity profiles we are not supposed to take I mean, that shouldn't be the only case.
Again, just I can't hear you. Can you ask me again?
So this is for boundary layer capture only, right? This EVR.
This is the eddy viscosity ratio. Yeah.
Eddy viscosity ratio is to know like up to what we should refine the mesh from the wall to capture the boundary layer perfectly. Am I right?
Yeah, it should have a maximum in the middle of the boundary layer.
It shouldn't be like monotonically increasing from the wall to free stream.
No, it shouldn't.
Why? Because in velocity, like if you take velocity profile, it will monotonically increase from 0 at the wall to free stream, right? So that we should consider our EVR. Why? Because here it's maximum at middle and again decreasing towards free stream. It's
I
looking like that.
I think we'll take a side note on that, and I'll send you one of my posts explaining exactly why it's not happening.
Okay. Thank
Okay,
you.
it's called phenomenology. I had one on lift and one on the phenomenology of engineering turbulence. And in the first one, which was not such a success, but I like it. I've explained a lot about the mechanism by which the turbulent stresses and molecular stresses interact with each other. So I think if you read that, you get fixed, and you can also stay in touch. I just don't want to now take a detour into a long explanation, which
it's okay. That's I understood. So you can send a mail. Continues.
Yeah. But remember me.
Yeah, sure. Definitely.
Okay, so you see examples: good, not good, stuff not good. This is also not so good sometimes to have a very large, very non-smooth mesh. But that's not the issue. Good, bad. Why is it bad? Because the EVM, the prism layer, doesn't cover all the boundary layer. You see? The EVR ratio, okay? The eddy viscosity ratio is the maximum outside the boundary layer. The boundary layer is actually here.
Yeah.
So you have influent EVR. You can show it. But since you mostly use constant viscosity, I don't see what's the difference between that and maybe the numbers would be more.
Sorry, Tomer, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What model is being used in these plots here? Do you know?
What model is used in what?
What turbulence model is being used to generate these for these examples that we're looking at?
What model is used?
Like, is it the K-omega or does it shouldn't look very different between K-omega, K-epsilon? The trend is pretty much the same.
Yeah, I don't think you'll see a difference. I mean, probably a delayed separation here, maybe in the K-epsilon, or it doesn't matter. It doesn't.
Okay.
I believe he used the K-omega SSD, being in the Tensor in the ANSI CP. I used to get emails from the team, from Mentor's team, sending orders to do some stuff. And So I believe it's the K-omega. Their intention is to turn ANSYS into a K-omega family. There is the scale adaptive simulation model, which is also K-omega model. There is the LCTM, the transition model, which is also a K-omega model. The detached ADDI simulation is in Fluent is based on K-omega, not on Spalat Almaraz. So they expect to use K-omega as the basis for a family of models, which you use. So we didn't talk about the Gekko. You wanna fast? You have any questions? Because there is something about how to build, what's best, what kind of mesh is good for what. Any kind of simple questions? Any hard questions? Shock boundary layer interaction in high Mach? Nothing? Do you want to finish, or do you want to go?
I have one question, Tomer. Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk too much from myself by my field of practicing, but I'm working for in the field of building ventilation regarding subway stations, and I've seen in some papers or some reports from practitioners that it's quite common to see quite poor mesh or quite coarse mesh use in like buildings near walls, because I think that they do not really want to resolve any walls effects, like no heat exchanging, and like a pressure loss. So could you say that when people are using quite coarse mesh as the one that you consider not good or bad, for those kind of application, doesn't really change the mainstream airflow estimations, like how the airflow path is changing from one connecting tunnels and things like that? Do you think that it gets the mainstream poor estimation?
I mean, you gave some examples, and I don't want to regard it the examples, but yeah, you have many applications of which you don't have to use such a refined mesh. I mean, lift, you can calculate without even regarding the boundary layer. I mean, and it depends what your aim is in the simulation. If you want to, it really depends what is the aim of the simulation. I mean, if you saw Brett Blocken, most of you probably know him from TUE. He's a professor of building and sports aerodynamics. He has a course in Coursera. I highly recommend taking. You can take it for free. You can pay $50 and get the certifications from TUE. But he's very good and he's very passionate, and there are many examples there and many exactly about building aerodynamics and sports aerodynamics. And you can see that there are very different things that you want to check in both of them. I mean, in building aerodynamics, you're usually more interested in the boundary layer of the environment, which is fucking huge. I mean, it could be meters high. And then when you have a cyclist and you want to calculate his CD, then you need a really, tiny mesh. I really recommend you taking the course. It's really easy. It's a really easy course. He's a really passionate and smart lecturer, and he's cool, and he knows his shit, and he shows many examples and many myth explodes many myths, many stuff that you thought should happen and doesn't. And I enjoyed every minute of it, even though I know most of the stuff.
Okay, thank you very much.
So, are we gonna finish, or do you wanna check out the Gekko really fast?
Yeah, go ahead with the Gekko.
Go ahead with Gekko. Okay, Gekko, where are you? Where are you, Gekko? Gekko. And then there were 6. I don't remember why the elephant was there, but the generalized K-omega model with 4 parameter, I can, and it's because of the John Fine Neumann quote. With 4 parameter, I can fit an elephant. With 5, I can make him wiggle his trunk. Okay. So what we have is, remember when we talked about the K-epsilon, the K-omega, you have constants which needs to be calibrated to match between K and epsilon, right? You have the C mu, you have the C alpha for the K omega, you have the C mu for the K epsilon. These are calibrated according to the law of the wall. You can't really change them. You can change them, but then you're not binding to the law of the wall. What Mentor did is added a few parameters which could be changed, and actually without disturbing the abundance to the law of the wall of the original parameters. It doesn't mean that you can, you cannot do rubbish with them, but that's the meaning of I like to talk a lot about stuff that is not important to the. Then there were 6. Okay, so he added a few parameters. I don't call them constants; they are parameters. Most important of them is C separation. C separation is, if you remember when we talked about the K epsilon and the K omega, and the delaying of separation in the K omega, and the delaying of separation in also in the BSL and the K omega SST solving it. And so this free parameter is the main contributor to the aggressiveness in the prediction of flow separation. Okay, so now you push Gekko, and then you have a parameter CSAP that you can adjust. I know the question will come. You don't have to ask it now, okay? You can see again the picture of the K epsilon, the SST model. You can have a set of parameters, 5 parameters we said, so 5 parameters which can define the K epsilon, 5 parameters, other parameters which will define the K omega SST. They won't be exactly the same. They are not exactly K epsilon standard and an SST model, but they are almost exactly for all intensive purposes. And you see that you don't get separation in one, and you get delayed separation. The flow is attached. In the SST model, you get a separation. The C and W is kind of a free parameter, which is of kind of low importance, and its intention is to limit the effect of the inner portion of the boundary layer on the shear stress, especially for non-equilibrium flows. You usually use that together with the CSAP. The 2 free parameters are those 2, the CSAP and this one, are those who are in charge of the boundary layer. CMix. Now we go to free shear flows. Reynolds average Navier-Stokes have many problems with free shear flows. The calibration for most of the turbulence models are based on the law of the wall. And there are many problems with free shear flows, especially those with, many turbulent content features, small eddies, big eddies. You can't really see that in. So CMix is kind of a free parameter to ensure. Yeah. You see a variety of free shear flows. And CMix is kind of a free parameter. We're still in the domain of runs, but we want to get something which is actually more consistent with what we would accept from a mixing layer, a Farwick, or a jet. So that's actually a parameter which doesn't deal with the boundary layer. It deals with the wake or the jet or the outside of the boundary layer. CJet is especially for these kind of ones. It's kind of some kind of derivative of. I mean, it's a less stronger impact than CMix. Okay, then you have C corner, which this one is very important. You have flows like the square duct, where I said when you see linear stress-strain relationship, like the Business hypothesis, and this is how the results looks. And with Gekko, you have direct numerical simulations, and look how the result looks. And with Gekko, you have the opportunity to get non-linear stress-strain relationships, which means you can get correct answers for flows which might seem very easy to solve, like square duct. This is not plain cut. And so that's an in the Gekko. The C curve. So it's here. So you can apply it in rotational flows. Again, you can read that also in the Spalat Almoraz post. It's the same issue exactly. Now I can show you the SST with a shear correction and without a shear correction. I talked about before about U-bend, and you can see there is a big difference between calculating with or without correction. Okay, now ANSYS has values which are recommended. Now the question must be asked. Is someone willing to ask it, or will I ask by myself? What parameters you prefer for each and every case? And the mental answer would probably be, if you do not know, do not touch them. So what you have here is two options. The default, which is actually the K-omega SST, and another option, which is given by the guidance. There's a guidebook for the GEKO model. If someone wants it, he can contact me. I can, send it to him. And actually, don't touch them if you don't know what you're doing. That's it. Interesting, huh? But again, I think they're going to take the GEKO and make it more versatile, maybe take it to other places, and maybe eventually have one model which can be switched on some kind of quick decisions, maybe even managed by an AI, or a steering, from right now, like steering and solve the problem by moving from model to model, from WM less to less, from monolithic less to runs again, SRS, scale resolving simulation if needed. And the future is near. I mean, we're getting there. Doesn't it feel like that? So, any questions before we?
I have a question. It's not really touching the last point that you touched, but if you have a SST simulation, steady state runs simulation, and you see that the behavior of this simulation is oscillating. I mean, you quickly achieve average status, then start oscillating between value. So you can, if you investigate the simulation, even if it's a steady state one, you can see some detachment that is something dynamical. I mean, what would you suggest to do in this case? When you oscillating behavior in steady state simulation?
Yeah, so the dependence is whether the oscillations are from a high energy source, which means from the outer flow. I mean, from I don't know, like you have a ball and it's it's oscillating like sinusoidally. And then even, I guess, you could see them, not converging, but oscillating. And, but you should still go for transient. And
exactly.
The other choice is that you are really off and you have a transient issue, or even worse, that you have like when you want to check loads on a rotor of helicopter, and you do a transient runs, and the results are rubbish because the most of the loads depends on the tip vortices, which you cannot capture by runs. So with low order methods, you should be very careful. I mean, that's why I don't like to say that we do simulation, we do analysis, or analysis and simulation. Post-processing is the most important thing. I mean, that's what we should be able to do in the end. I mean, that's the vision of NASA. To cut the human from the loop the most that he can, from, you know, building the geometry, doing the mesh, and defining the solver. Just post-process the result and validate them. And any questions? Any other questions? Okay, then. Please do visit and support.
Oui, ben,
Yeah.
je vois aussi, ça me fait.
What? Please support by, I don't know, sharing and liking posts. We're going to expand. We have expanded from, I think, 500 views a day to about 2,000 views a day the past 3 months. And anyone who wants to be an author in the blog may you know, suggest himself, as long as he feels that he likes it. It's free. And more than that, do CFD, be good people. I wish all of you and your loved ones health and you know, taking care of your loved ones in these turbulent times we're having. And it's kind of good we can meet on Zoom, and I hope to do it more often. I enjoyed it very much. I hope you did too.
Thank you, Tomar.
And Rajat, you're here? You okay? Very good. I don't know how many people. Let's see how many people are there. Let's see how many participants. Every time came, I didn't see anyone. We have some participants, not too many, but enough to enjoy it. Okay. So have a good weekend, guys. Next time, find a better another topic to talk about. Bye-bye.
Bye, sir.